A woman lay crumpled in the dirt, her back a mess of bloody stripes showing through her torn dress. Elias dropped to his knees beside her. Her breath came shallow and weak, her skin burning with fever. When he gently turned her over, his stomach clenched at the sight of the branded letter M on her shoulder. A slave mark. "Dear God," he whispered, his hands hovering uncertainly over her unconscious form. The law was clear. Helping an escaped slave meant prison. But leaving her to die wasn't something his conscience would allow. With trembling arms, he scooped her up. She weighed almost nothing, her body limp against his chest as he carried her toward his cabin. The morning birds kept singing, oblivious to the weight of his choice. Inside, he laid her carefully on his wooden table. Blood from her wounds had soaked through to his shirt. He grabbed clean rags and his water bucket, working quickly to clean the ugly gashes. The whip marks were fresh, probably not even a day old. As he worked, his jaw clenched tighter. He recognized the pattern. These were Royce Maddox's work. The plantation owner's cruelty was well known in these parts. The woman's eyes flew open suddenly. She jerked away from his touch, nearly falling off the table. "Don't touch me!" Her voice was hoarse but fierce. She pressed herself against the wall, wild-eyed. "I won't hurt you," Elias said, backing away with his hands raised. "You're safe here." "Safe?" She laughed bitterly. "You'll just send me back to Maddox." "No," Elias said firmly, surprising himself with his certainty. "I won't." She studied him, chest heaving. "Why should I believe you?" Elias swallowed hard. "Because I've never—" He flushed, looking down. "I've never even touched a woman before today. Not like this. Not ever." His voice shook. "I know what Maddox does to people. I won't send anyone back to that." Something shifted in her eyes. Not trust exactly, but the edge of her panic softened. "I'm Rachel," she said quietly. "Elias Turner." He gestured to her wounds. "Please, let me help clean these before they get infected." After a long moment, Rachel nodded. She sat still as he resumed cleaning the cuts, though her muscles remained tense under his careful touch. Neither spoke as he worked, the silence broken only by her occasional sharp intake of breath when he found a particularly deep gash. "You should rest," he said when he finished, helping her to his narrow cot. She was unsteady on her feet, the fever still burning through her. "They'll come looking," she murmured, even as her eyes grew heavy. "I know." Elias pulled his rough blanket over her. "But you're not alone anymore." Rachel's eyes closed, exhaustion finally claiming her. Elias settled into his wooden chair beside the cot, facing the door. His father's old rifle leaned in the corner, and his hands itched to hold it. Every sound from outside, birds, wind, the creak of trees, made his heart jump. Slave hunters could appear at any moment. He glanced at Rachel's sleeping form. The morning sun through his window caught the tears drying on her cheeks. Something fierce and protective tightened in his chest. Whatever came next, he knew he'd made the right choice. The late morning sun filled the cabin with golden light as Rachel stirred on the cot. Her eyes fluttered open to find Elias hunched over the fireplace, stirring something in an iron pot. He kept his back deliberately turned, giving her privacy even as he glanced occasionally over his shoulder to check on her. The smell of chicken broth made her stomach growl. Rachel tried to sit up, but pain lanced through her back. She couldn't hold back a small gasp. Elias spun around, nearly knocking over the pot. "Don't move too quick," he said, steadying himself. "The wounds are still fresh." Rachel studied him in the daylight. His hands were rough from ranch work, but they trembled slightly as he ladled broth into a wooden bowl. Everything about him seemed to shake a little, like he was terrified, but refusing to run. "Why are you really helping me?" she asked bluntly. "What do you want?" Elias nearly dropped the bowl. "Nothing. I mean, He set the broth down and ran a hand through his already messy hair. "It's just right. Helping you is right." "Nothing's just right anymore," Rachel said. "Not in this world." "Maybe." He moved closer, hovering uncertainly. "But I can't change what's right and wrong just because the law says different." His earnestness caught her off guard. There was no smooth charm, no hidden agenda in his stumbling words. Just raw honesty that made her chest ache. "I need to sit up," she said softly. "Will you help me?" He approached carefully, like she was a spooked horse. His arms were strong but gentle as he helped her rise. Their bodies pressed together for a moment, and Rachel felt him stiffen, his breath catching. "I haven't had sex in 6 months," she blurted out, immediately wanting to bite back the words. But something in her needed to say it, needed to claim her body as her own. "The escaped slave woman said to the virgin rancher," she added, half defiant, half mortified. Elias's face turned scarlet. He stepped back, looking everywhere but at her. "I've never—" He swallowed hard. "Not with anyone. Ever." The confession hung between them, stripped bare of pretense. Rachel felt something shift in her chest, a wall crumbling just slightly. "Here," he said, holding out the bowl of broth. His hands were still shaking. Rachel took it, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. "Thank you." She took a careful sip. "I had to run. I didn't have a choice anymore." "What happened?" "Maddox." The name tasted like poison on her tongue. "He killed Thomas. Beat him to death right in front of everyone because Thomas begged him not to sell his daughter." Her hands tightened on the bowl. "Thomas was my friend. He taught me to read in secret. And Maddox—" Her voice cracked. "Maddox made us watch him die. Said it was a lesson." Elias sank into his chair, face pale. "Dear God. I ran that night. Knew he'd kill me too if he caught me. But I couldn't." Rachel's throat closed up. "I couldn't stay and pretend anymore, not after Thomas." "He'll be hunting you hard," Elias said quietly. "A reading slave who witnessed murder." "I know." Rachel met his eyes. "You shouldn't keep me here. It's too dangerous." Before Elias could respond, the crunch of footsteps on gravel cut through the morning quiet. They both froze as the steps drew closer, stopping directly outside the cabin's front door. The heavy thud of boots on the porch made Elias's heart hammer. He glanced at Rachel, who had already slid silently from the cot and pressed herself against the wall beside the door, out of sight. Her eyes were wide but steady, hands balled into fists. Elias opened the door just enough to block the interior view. 3 men sat mounted on sweating horses, their rifles laid casually across their thighs. The lead rider, a weather-beaten man with a face like tanned leather, spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. "Morning," the man drawled. "Name's Wade. We're looking for property belonging to Mr. Royce Maddox." His lips twisted into an ugly smile. "A runaway negress. Tracked her trail near these parts." Elias forced his voice to stay level. "Haven't seen anyone. Pretty quiet out here." The second rider, younger and mean-eyed, leaned forward in his saddle. "That right? Because we found fresh blood on some thorns about a quarter-mile north, leading right toward your land." "Probably a wounded deer," Elias said. "There's plenty around." The third rider, who hadn't spoken, suddenly pointed at Elias's sleeve. "What's that there?" Elias's stomach dropped. A dark brown stain marked his shirt cuff. Rachel's dried blood from when he'd carried her inside. "Butchered a chicken yesterday," he said, but his voice cracked slightly. The young rider dismounted, spurs jingling. "Mind if we take a look inside, just to be thorough?" He stepped toward the door. Elias shifted, blocking the way more firmly. "I mind very much." The rider's hand drifted to his pistol. "That so? Since when did quiet Elias Turner get so brave?" since people started thinking they could walk into my home without asking. Elias's throat was dry, but he didn't move. Wade's eyes narrowed. Careful, boy. Mr. Maddox doesn't take kindly to folks interfering with his business. I'm not interfering with anything, Elias said. But this is my property, and you're not welcome inside. The young rider took another step forward, close enough that Elias could smell whiskey on his breath. They stared at each other, the tension crackling like summer lightning. Finally, the rider's mouth twisted into a cruel smile. Well now, ain't this interesting? He backed away, swinging into his saddle. Mr. Maddox will surely want to hear about your sudden bravery, Turner. The three men wheeled their horses around, but didn't leave immediately. They rode slowly around the cabin, studying the ground, peering through windows. Elias stood rooted to the porch, pulse thundering in his ears, until they finally spurred their mounts toward the tree line. He waited until they were completely out of sight before closing the door. His legs nearly gave out as he turned to Rachel. She was shaking, but her jaw was set with determination. They'll be back. Yes. Elias ran a trembling hand through his hair. With Maddox himself, probably. I have to leave. Rachel straightened despite her wounds. Now. We have to leave, Elias corrected quietly. They saw enough to be suspicious. I'm not safe here anymore either. Rachel studied him for a long moment. You'd give up your home? For me? It's just a cabin. Elias began pulling supplies from shelves. Dried meat, hardtack, blankets. We need to be gone before sunset. They worked quickly and silently. Elias packed saddlebags while Rachel bundled what food she could carry. The afternoon sun was hanging low when Elias finally led his horse around from the stable. He helped Rachel mount, trying to be gentle with her injuries. She gritted her teeth, but made no sound as she settled into the saddle. Elias swung up behind her, and they rode into the deepening shadows of the forest, leaving the only home he'd ever known behind. The forest swallowed them in darkness as night crept in. Moonlight filtered through the branches, casting strange shadows across the trail. Elias felt Rachel's tension in how rigidly she sat before him, her back straight despite her wounds. We need to slow down, Rachel whispered, touching his arm. The horse is leaving clear tracks. Elias pulled back on the reins. I don't know much about covering trails. I do. Rachel's voice was grim. Had to learn. Stop here. She slid carefully from the saddle, wincing as her feet hit the ground. Moving to a nearby pine tree, she broke off a large branch and demonstrated how to sweep it across their tracks, erasing the hoofprints. Like this, she said, dragging the branch in a natural pattern. Don't just brush straight. Make it look like fallen pine needles. She handed him another branch. You take the left side, I'll take the right. Elias followed her lead, amazed at how quickly the obvious trail disappeared under their careful work. Where did you learn this? First time I tried running, Rachel said quietly. Made it 3 days before they caught me. But I watched how they tracked, learned what they looked for. She straightened, leaning on the branch for support. Each time I got better. How many times did you try? 4. She met his eyes in the darkness. This is my last try. I won't go back alive. Elias nodded, understanding the weight of her words. There's an old trapper's cabin about 2 miles ahead. My pa used to trade with him when I was young. Been abandoned for years now. They continued slower, taking turns clearing their trail. The work was tedious, but necessary. Every so often, Rachel would stop, head cocked, listening intently to the forest sounds. During one such pause, a distant baying echoed through the trees. Rachel's whole body tensed. Hounds. How far? Miles yet. But Maddox brought his dogs. She gripped the pine branch tighter. We need to move faster. The old cabin appeared just as Elias remembered it. A crude structure of rough logs with a partially collapsed roof. But the stone chimney still stood strong, and the walls were solid enough to block the wind. Inside, dried straw covered half the floor. Rachel sank onto it gratefully, while Elias gathered wood for the hearth. The small fire he built cast dancing shadows on the walls. "Not too much smoke," Rachel cautioned. "Even at night it carries." Elias nodded, keeping the flames low. He watched as Rachel checked her bandages, her movements careful but practiced. "Let me help?" She hesitated only briefly before nodding. As he helped her clean and rebind the wounds, their fingers brushed. Neither pulled away immediately. "Thank you," Rachel said softly, "for everything." "I couldn't have done anything else," Elias replied. A low rumble of thunder interrupted them. Rain began pattering on the remaining roof, quickly building to a downpour. Lightning flashed through the gaps above, illuminating Rachel's face in stark bursts. "Storm's a blessing," she said, settling back on the straw. "Dogs can't track in this." Elias added another small log to the fire. "We'll wait it out here." They sat in companionable silence, listening to the storm rage outside. Despite the danger hunting them, despite the uncertainty ahead, Elias felt an unfamiliar peace. They were in this together now, partners in a desperate flight toward freedom. Thunder cracked overhead, making the old cabin shudder. Through the gaps in the roof, rain dripped steadily, but near the hearth they remained dry. Lightning flashed again, and in that brief, bright moment, Elias caught Rachel watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Dawn crept into the cabin through gaps in the roof, accompanied by the steady drumming of rain. The storm that had sheltered them through the night showed no signs of letting up. Water dripped steadily into a corner, creating a small puddle on the rough wooden floor. Elias stirred from his position by the dying fire, adding the last of their dry wood. He glanced at Rachel, who had managed a few hours of fitful sleep on the straw. Her face was drawn with pain, and dark patches had seeped through her bandages. "We need to change these," he said softly, reaching for his pack. Rachel nodded, sitting up slowly. "The bleeding's mostly stopped, but they still hurt," Elias finished, pulling out fresh strips of cloth. His hands trembled slightly as he helped her remove the old bandages. The welts across her back were angry and red, though thankfully showing no signs of infection. "I'm sorry," he whispered, dabbing carefully at the wounds with a damp cloth. "I'm trying not to hurt you." "Your touch is gentle," Rachel said, her voice rough. "Gentler than anyone's been in a long time." Their closeness in the dim cabin felt different than it had the night before. Every brush of his fingers against her skin sent awareness coursing through them both. The sound of their breathing seemed louder than the rain. "The family that helped me," Rachel said suddenly, breaking the charged silence. "Maddox found out. The father, John, he had a little girl. She was only 6. Her voice cracked. "They whipped him in front of her, made her watch." Elias's hands stilled on her back. "Rachel, when I couldn't stand it anymore, I confessed. But Maddox," she drew a shuddering breath. "He said it was too late for mercy. Said they needed to learn. The mother, Sarah, she tried to stop them. They sold her that same day. Royce Maddox will answer for what he's done," Elias said, his quiet voice hard with conviction. "One day, he'll face justice for every person he's hurt." Rachel turned to look at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. A shiver ran through her body, whether from cold or memory, Elias couldn't tell. Without hesitation, he unwrapped the blanket from his shoulders and draped it around her. "You'll get cold," she protested. "I'm fine," he insisted, tucking the edges around her. Their faces were very close now. Rachel lifted her hand, hesitated, then gently touched his cheek. Her fingers were rough from years of hard labor, but her touch was incredibly soft. Elias felt his heart thundering in his chest. "You're nothing like what I expected," she whispered. Elias turned his face slightly into her palm, and Rachel's breath caught. Slowly, giving her time to pull away, he leaned forward. Their lips met in a careful, questioning kiss. It was clumsy and tender and perfect. Everything a first kiss should be. When they separated, Rachel's eyes were wide with wonder. Elias knew his expression probably matched hers. The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken possibilities. The rain's intensity finally began to lessen, changing from a downpour to a gentle patter. Sunlight broke through the clouds, sending weak rays through the cabin's roof. "We should get moving," Rachel said softly, though she made no immediate move to stand. "Mary Whitfield's place is still far." Elias nodded, reluctantly breaking their closeness to gather their meager supplies. They worked quietly, efficiently, packing everything that might be useful for the journey ahead. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Mary Whitfield's farmland as Elias and Rachel emerged from the tree line. The widow stood on her porch, a rifle held casually but ready in her weathered hands. Her sharp eyes softened when she recognized them. "Lord above," Mary breathed, lowering her weapon. "You must be the one Sarah wrote about." She hurried down the steps, her gray hair escaping its neat bun. "Come inside, quickly now." The farmhouse was warm and smelled of fresh bread. Mary led them to the cellar, moving aside barrels to reveal a hidden room lined with blankets and supplies. "You'll be safe here," she assured them, her kind face creased with concern as she examined Rachel's wounds. "I've got medicine that'll help with the pain." Over the next day, Mary proved to be not just a protector, but a teacher. She took Elias behind the barn, showing him how to handle her collection of rifles. "My late husband believed every soul has the right to defend themselves," she explained, adjusting Elias's grip on the weapon. "These days, I'm inclined to agree." Rachel rested, her strength returning under Mary's careful nursing. By nightfall, the three shared a quiet supper of beans and cornbread. Mary's stories of successful escapes gave them hope, though her warnings about Royce's ruthlessness cast a shadow over their plans. Later, in the hidden cellar room, Rachel and Elias lay close on their shared pallet. The space felt intimate, protected. When Rachel traced her fingers along Elias's jaw, his breath caught. "I trust you," she whispered, and those simple words held worlds of meaning. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative. The second was deeper, years of loneliness melting away as they explored each other with tender curiosity. Elias's calloused hands moved with careful reverence over Rachel's skin, mindful of her healing wounds. Rachel's fingers tangled in his hair, drawing him closer. They moved together slowly, learning each other's bodies with sweet awkwardness that gradually gave way to rising passion. Their breathing grew ragged, mixing with the soft sounds of skin on skin. When Rachel arched beneath him, Elias kissed away the tears that slipped from her closed eyes. They found their rhythm together, two souls merging in the darkness, finally whole. The peace was shattered by barking dogs. Mary's urgent voice cut through their sleep. "Get dressed! They're coming!" They scrambled into clothes as boots thundered overhead. Mary hustled them toward a concealed door at the back of the cellar. "Thomas at the general store must have talked," she said grimly. "He always did put profit before principle." The door opened to cool night air. They were halfway across the yard when shots rang out. Mary cried out, crimson blooming across her chest as she fell. "No!" Elias turned back, but Rachel grabbed his arm. "She's giving us a chance," Rachel choked out. "We have to run." More shots cracked through the darkness. They sprinted for the trees, but rough hands seized Elias from behind. The rifle butt caught him across the temple with savage force. Rachel screamed as chains were locked around her wrists. Strong arms dragged her toward a waiting wagon. She fought wildly, but it was useless. Through tears, she watched Elias crumple to the ground, blood running down his face as the wagon lurched into motion, carrying her back toward the nightmare she'd fled. Pain exploded behind Elias's eyes as consciousness returned. The morning sun stabbed through his swollen eyelids, and the copper taste of blood filled his mouth. He pushed himself up from Mary's porch, his hands slipping in something wet and sticky. When his vision cleared, his stomach lurched. He was lying in a pool of Mary's blood. The farmhouse smoldered behind him, black smoke curling into the dawn sky. The windows were shattered, and charred timber showed through the scorched walls. Mary's body was gone, likely consumed by the flames Royce's men had set before departing. Elias stumbled to his feet, bile rising in his throat. His head throbbed where the rifle had struck him, and dried blood matted his hair. But physical pain meant nothing compared to the knowledge that Rachel was gone, taken back to a monster who would make her suffer for daring to seek freedom. That's when he saw it. Deep cuts in the trunk of the old oak tree beside the porch, letters carved with cruel precision. She dies at dawn. The message was signed with Royce's initials, a final taunt meant to break Elias's spirit. Instead, something hardened inside him. The shy, hesitant rancher who'd never raised a hand in violence felt those parts of himself fall away. In their place rose a cold, focused fury. Rachel needed him. There would be time for grief and guilt later. Inside the smoking ruins, Elias found Mary's gun cabinet somehow intact. He selected 2 rifles he'd practiced with yesterday, slinging them across his back. Boxes of ammunition filled his pockets. In the barn, Mary's sturdy bay horse waited, forgotten by the raiders in their haste to leave. "Easy, girl," he murmured, quickly saddling her. The horse seemed to sense his urgency, dancing beneath him as he swung up. They thundered down the road, following the deep wagon ruts that led toward the river. Rachel had taught him to read signs during their flight through the woods. Now he saw them everywhere. Broken branches at head height, distinctive marks in the mud where she'd dragged her feet. She was leaving him a trail, believing in him even in her captivity. His chest tightened with pride and fear. The morning grew warmer as Elias pushed the horse hard. Sweat soaked his shirt, but he barely noticed. His mind filled with memories of Rachel, her quiet strength as she taught him to cover their tracks, her soft touch when she'd traced his face in the cellar, the way she'd trusted him completely during their night together. She'd awakened something in him he never knew existed. Now she needed that same strength from him. 2 hours of hard riding brought him to the river's high bluffs. He dismounted, leading the horse through the trees until he reached a cliff edge. Below, Royce's camp spread along the riverbank. 4 canvas tents stood in a half-circle, with men moving between them carrying rifles. A cooking fire sent smoke rising into the morning air, and horses were picketed near the water. Then he saw her. Rachel was tied to a wooden post near the river's edge, her head bowed but her back straight. Even from this distance, Elias could see the defiance in her posture. 2 armed guards stood nearby, occasionally glancing at the rising sun. They were waiting for dawn's full arrival, waiting to carry out Royce's brutal sentence. Elias crouched behind a fallen log, studying the camp's layout. His hands were steady as he checked both rifles, counting ammunition and measuring distances. The shy man who'd found Rachel at his fence was gone. In his place was someone who would do whatever necessary to save the woman he loved. Elias's hands moved with deliberate calm as he positioned Mary's rifle against the fallen log. Rachel had shown him how to control his breathing during their brief shooting lessons. In through the nose, out through the mouth, squeeze between heartbeats. Now, those lessons meant life or death. Through the scope, he could see every detail of the camp below. The first guard leaned against a tree, rifle held lazily across his chest. The second paced near Rachel, occasionally prodding her with his boot. Their arrogance would be their undoing. They never thought to look up. Elias centered the crosshairs on the first guard's chest. The morning was dead silent, perfect conditions for the shot. He remembered Rachel's words. "Don't rush. Make it count." His finger tightened on the trigger. The rifle's crack echoed off the cliff face. The first guard crumpled without a sound, his body hidden by tall grass. Before the others could react, Elias had already chambered another round. The second guard barely had time to look up before the bullet found him. Elias was moving before the second body hit the ground. He scrambled down the cliff face, using roots and rocks as handholds, the second rifle bouncing against his back. Loose stones clattered beneath his boots. But speed mattered more than stealth now. A third guard emerged from behind a tent, raising his weapon. Elias dropped to one knee, bringing up the rifle in a single motion. The guard's shot went wide. Elias's didn't. "Rachel!" he shouted, sprinting toward the post where she was bound. Her eyes were wide but fierce as he cut through the ropes with his knife. "Can you run?" "Behind you!" she screamed. Elias spun, raising the rifle, but Royce was already too close. The plantation owner's fist connected with Elias's jaw, sending him sprawling. The rifle skittered away across the rocks. "You stupid white trash!" Royce's face was purple with rage as he kicked Elias in the ribs. "Throwing your life away for a black whore? I'll hang you both!" Elias rolled away from another kick and surged to his feet, tackling Royce around the waist. They crashed to the ground, trading wild punches. Royce was heavier, stronger, fueled by hate and entitlement. He pinned Elias, hands wrapping around his throat. "Watch this, girl!" Royce snarled at Rachel. "Watch what happens to those who help runaway property." Black spots danced in Elias's vision as he clawed at Royce's fingers. Then came a sickening crack, and suddenly he could breathe again. Royce's eyes went wide, his mouth working soundlessly. He toppled sideways, revealing Rachel standing behind him, holding a glowing branding iron from the morning's fire. "That's for every person you've ever marked," Rachel spat, striking him again. The iron connected with Royce's temple, and he stumbled backward, arms windmilling. His boot caught on a rock, and he pitched over the riverbank. The current caught him instantly. Royce thrashed, weighed down by his heavy coat and gun belt. "Help!" he screamed, all authority gone from his voice. "Please! I can't The river swallowed his words, dragging him under. They watched until the ripples smoothed away, leaving only the river's endless flow. Rachel's legs gave out. Elias caught her before she could fall, and they sank together onto the rocky shore. She buried her face in his chest, her whole body trembling. Elias held her tight, his own hands shaking as the violence of the morning crashed over him. "You came for me," Rachel whispered against his shirt. "I'll always come for you," Elias promised, pressing his lips to her hair. They clung to each other on the bloodied riverbank, survivor and protector, their hearts beating in fierce synchronicity as the sun climbed higher in the morning sky. The Kansas Territory spread before them like a dream made real, endless prairie grass swaying in the dawn breeze. Elias guided their tired horse across the invisible boundary line as the sun crested the horizon. Rachel's arms tightened around his waist, and he felt her exhale deeply against his back. "We're here," he said softly. "You're free now, by law." Rachel's laugh was small but fierce. "Been free since I ran. The law's just catching up." They rode until they found a secluded creek. There, they shed the last traces of their flight. Rachel took Royce's branding iron, the weapon that had secured their escape, and hurled it into the deepest part of the water. Elias burned their blood-stained clothes, watching the smoke disappear into the morning sky. "No more looking over our shoulders," Elias said, taking her hand. "No more running." The abolitionist settlement appeared by midday, a cluster of simple cabins with smoke rising from their chimneys. A weathered sign read, "New Hope." Children played freely in the dusty street, black and white together. Rachel's grip on Elias's hand tightened at the sight. The settlement's leader, Reverend Thompson, welcomed them with knowing eyes. He'd seen their kind before, couples fleeing Missouri's shadows with love that defied cruel laws. Inside his cabin, he drafted the papers that would protect Rachel under Kansas territory law. "Sign here," he said, sliding the document toward her. Rachel's hand trembled slightly as she took the pen. She'd taught herself to write in secret years ago, and now her name, her full, true name, flowed onto the paper with deliberate strokes. "Those papers make it official," Reverend Thompson said. "But I suspect you two have another document in mind." 4 days later, they stood beneath a massive oak tree, its branches spreading wide over the prairie grass. Rachel wore a simple blue dress borrowed from one of the settler women. Elias had shaved carefully that morning, his face still bearing the healing scratches from their escape. The whole settlement gathered to witness. These people understood that every marriage between free hearts was a victory against the darkness they'd all fled. "Elias Turner," Rachel's voice carried clear and strong across the prairie wind. "I choose you. Not because you saved me, I saved myself. I choose you because you saw me as human when others saw property. Because you learned from me as much as you protected me. Because your heart is gentle, but your spine is steel. I give you my love freely, not from gratitude or necessity, but because of the man you've proven yourself to be." Elias's voice shook as he spoke. "Rachel, I promise you this. Your body is your own. Your choices are your own. Your future belongs to you alone. I'll stand beside you, not above you. I'll listen more than I speak. I'll remember that your strength taught me courage. Everything I am, everything I have, I share with you as an equal. Not because the law says so, but because my heart knows no other way to love you." Reverend Thompson's words made it official, but their truth had been sealed days ago by a riverside, written in blood and courage and choices freely made. They walked away from the oak tree hand in hand, the settlement's cheers fading behind them. Ahead stood their new cabin, built by the community while they recovered. The door was freshly painted blue, Rachel's choice. Through its open doorway lay their future, waiting to be written on their own terms.